A few years ago, back when I was much more open to strange adventures, it all started when I met a girl online. For this story, we'll call her Lisa. She struck me as someone who wasn't afraid to try new things. She had these bold streaks of green in her hair, a couple of quirky tattoos, and a way of chatting that made her feel easy to talk to. We headed off right away, and before long, we agreed to meet up. Instead of a normal dinner or coffee date, Lisa suggested something that immediately caught my interest. She had a spot she wanted to show me for a nighttime explore. Turns out, her idea of something different was this forgotten hospital sitting quietly at the edge of the city. It was a place I'd heard stories about growing up, but I'd never worked up the nerve to check it out. She told me it's mostly deserted now, just old, boarded-up windows, overgrown grass out front, and the kind of silence that makes you whisper even when you're sure you're alone. I picked Lisa up just after sunset. The drive out to the hospital was about 20 minutes, with enough time for us to talk in the car and relax a little bit around each other. The air had that early autumn chill, and Lisa was ready for it. Worn jeans, a layered shirt, and a weathered backpack that looked like it's seen 100 adventures already. She guided me to park on an empty street behind some overgrown hedges. It wasn't the main entrance. Lisa said that was watched sometimes, especially at night, but a quieter spot where we could slip in without anyone noticing. We hopped a small guardrail, the cool metal sting in my hands, and cut across the old parking lot. The windows of the hospital glowed faintly in the streetlights, but the building itself looked like it was holding its breath. Getting inside was easier than I expected. Lisa found a broken window that led down into the old laundry basement. She had clearly done this before, moving through the shadows quietly, making sure to keep our flashlights pointed low so nobody would see us from the outside. The place was even bigger from the inside, always running in every direction and doors hanging open at weird angles. It's strange how quickly you start to feel small in a place like that. For the first few minutes, we walked side by side, whispering and shining our lights on the old P-Link panes. There were still faded numbers taped to some of the doors, like the patients who'd slept there had just slipped off the night before. The echo of our shoes against the gritty floor was the only sound most of the time. Lisa led the way most of the time. She'd pause every now and then, tell me little facts about the hospital, how her older sister had worked there for one summer, how people said you could still find paperwork tucked in some of the old offices. I kept thinking about how quiet it was, like the whole building was listening in on her conversation. On the first floor, Lisa stopped to check her phone. That's when I noticed she was talking a little louder than I thought was safe. Sound bounced down the halls, and once in a while, I worried we might not be alone after all. Every so often, we'd hear a distant clang, or maybe just something settling in the dark, and we'd both freeze. Once, we heard what sounded like slow, heavy footsteps. We immediately switched off our flashlights and held our breaths, standing still in a dark corridor, swallowing up all the light. It felt like the building itself didn't want us there. After another minute, we heard a loud bang, a door slamming somewhere on the floor above. Without saying a word, Lisa nudged me to keep moving. We walked quickly and tried a stairwell that dumped us on the old surgical wing. Here, broken equipment littered the rooms and faded curtains hung limp. Sometimes we'd turn a corner and our lights would catch an old gurney, making us both jump. Lisa tried to keep the mood calm by making small jokes, but even she seemed more on edge now. She suggested we take a break on a landing that led us out onto what she described as a rooftop garden. But garden was a generous description. The only thing left were some weeds breaking through the cracked cement. Even then, being outside brought a little relief. The city lights blinked far away, but here it was just us and the wind and the deep hush that comes with abandoned places. We were still trying to relax when another noise brought us back to reality. The sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from inside. We ducked behind a half-fallen wall and waited. My heart pounded as the steps grew closer, carrying the deep certainty that whoever or whatever was coming was not another curious explorer. Lisa mouthed that it made us stay silent, pressing herself flat against the stone. We heard a man's voice then, rough and a little too tearful, calling out that he had seen our lights. Lisa gripped my sleeve tight, whispering there shouldn't have been anyone else there at that hour. We stared at each other, our breaths short and short in the cold air. As quietly as we could, we slipped back inside, choosing a different set of stairs that led us down 3 floors in near darkness. The corridor was tighter here, everything covered in old dust that clung to our shoes. As we hurried along, we realized there were shadows moving in the stairwell above us. The man was following, his footsteps thudding with a strange determination. Lisa took a sharp turn into a children's ward, guiding us over sagging floorboards and past a mural of cartoon animals dulled by time. We moved as fast as we dared, trying not to make more noise than necessary. At one point, we ducked into a supply closet, holding our breath as the man passed by just inches from where we hid. I remember the heavy smell of old paper and bleach stinging my nose. We waited until his footsteps faded before we dared to move again, making our way back to the basement window, like walking a tightrope. Every sound seemed louder, every step slower, as if time itself was stretching. By the time I climbed back out to the broken glass, my hands were shaking. Outside, the city air felt thick and new. Lisa and I had made a run for the car, not daring to look back in case the man had found another way out. We jumped inside, slammed the doors, and locked them. Neither of us spoke for a few moments, both of us just breathing and listening to our own hearts pounding in our ears. Eventually, we drove off, windows careful, letting the night air clear our heads. We didn't go straight home. We stopped at a small diner that was always open, ordered coffee, and tried to laugh off the nerves. That wasn't easy. Some part of me still felt like there were eyes on us, watching from the shadowy windows of the hospital. Lisa and I eventually decided to keep in touch. Our time exploring the hospital gave us a story to share, but neither of us ever suggested going back, not even as a joke. Sometimes late at night, I remember the feeling of that old building, the way every hallway seemed to stretch just a little too far, the sense that someone was always one turn behind you. Every now and then, I still get chills thinking about it. If you're ever tempted to explore somewhere forgotten, remember this: not every locked door is waiting to be opened. And sometimes the real scare isn't the place itself, but the people you run into when you expect to be alone.
Before I fully settled into my studies, long before this chapter of life truly began, I took a job that could only be described as practical. I worked evening shifts as a porter in a hospital not far from where I lived. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work. Most nights were routine, ensuring patients were comfortable, checking in on various wards, and relocating supplies. By day, that hospital was full of life and noise. At night, it turned quiet and still. There were always a handful of patients who needed close attention, but the bulk of the place was empty. Most of my shift was spent in silence, walking quiet halls, finding comfort in the predictability. When I first started, a few long-timers told me about the Shuck Wing. a section of the hospital closed off years ago. The official word was that it had structural problems, unsafe for anyone to use. But the way people avoided talking about it, how they'd drop their voices or just shake their heads, always made it sound like more than that. One shift, I was asked to bring some equipment over to a storage room just beyond the doors of the closed wing. It was an unusual request, but I didn't think much of it. A nurse quietly warned me to avoid that hallway, but curiosity and the need to get my work done pushed me forward. As I headed down the corridor, the temperature dropped. There's a chill you get in old buildings, but this felt deeper, almost heavy. The floor tiles echoed back every step. The air was full of dust motes floating in my flashlight's beam. I passed rooms with doors hanging open or sealed up with faded tape. Some had beds, others were empty except for old hospital furniture and lingering shadows. It was unsettling, but I tried to brush it off. Reaching the storage room at the far end, I stepped in and started searching for the supplies. That's when I heard something. At first, it was just a faint humming noise from somewhere down the hall. My first thought was pipes or the heater rattling, but it got louder, turning into a slow, steady tapping, like someone gently knocking behind one of the doors. Trying to convince myself it was nothing, I edged toward the room the sound was coming from. The door was open just a crack. I peered in. My light barely touched the darkness. Inside, I made out the shape of a narrow bed and an old chair. On the wall, I saw something that didn't fit. Symbols drawn in something dark, ranged around the chair in a circle on the floor. They were rough, like someone made them in a rush, and so out of place in a hospital. Despite every instinct telling me to turn away, I stepped into the room. The air felt unusually cold and thick, almost hard to breathe. Suddenly, from the opposite corner, the tapping started up again, closer this time. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing, just shadows pressed against the wall. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Quiet, but clear, right at my ear, telling me I didn't belong there. My whole body froze. I turned round, but the only thing behind me was empty space. The whisper came again, stronger this time. Leave now. I didn't wait any longer. I practically ran from that room, shut the door behind me, and grabbed the equipment I'd originally come for. Turning to leave the hallway, I realized the tapping was getting louder. It seemed to be coming from every room now, as if someone or something was knocking from inside each one. The hairs stood up on my neck as I hurried back, the sound growing louder with every step. The hallway felt smaller and tighter, like the walls were starting to move in. When I finally reached the elevator, my hands were shaking so much that it was a struggle to push the button. The door slid open and I rushed inside. And as they were closing, I heard a last whisper, "Don't leave yet." So soft that I wondered if I imagined it. As the elevator began to move, I spotted a shape in the reflection of the metal doors. A figure at the end of the hall, standing perfectly still, watching. I didn't look back. As soon as those doors opened, I practically stumbled out, not stopping until I was outside, with the cool air of my face. Even now, any time I pass that hallway that's always locked tight, there's a feeling that someone unseen is still waiting, just out of sight, on the other side of that door. If you've ever spent time in an old hospital at night, you'll know what I mean when I say some places feel like they remember everything. Sometimes it's safer not to ask questions, and to avoid places everyone else is quietly steering clear of.
A few years before now, I was desperate for work and took a job as an aide at a hospital not far from home. Bills were piling up, and the hospital didn't require much beyond a clean background check. I was assigned to night shifts on the 4th floor, which was the memory care wing. At first, the work seemed straightforward, helping older folks with meals and making sure they got their medicine. My supervisor, Miss Parker, ran a tight ship. She always wore the brightest scrubs I had ever seen, smiling in that way that felt just a bit too careful. The first days felt normal enough. Most of the patients just needed extra help getting by. There was an older woman, Mrs. Washington, who always wondered when her daughter would visit. I checked the sign-in sheet, but there were never visitors scheduled for her. It was the same for a few others. Weeks went by and nobody came. When I brought it up at lunch, Miss Parker brushed it off and said visits could be upsetting at this stage, so families chose to stay away. What really unsettled me was the treatment routine. Every resident received 2 injections a day, but the medications were unlabeled and always brought in by a doctor I rarely saw. He'd show up with a locked case and never explained what was inside. Once I tried to ask about it, but his answer was short. It's a new treatment. Don't ask further. After that, things got strange. Mrs. Washington, once so talkative, became silent almost overnight. Mr. Lee, who loved to tell jokes during dinner, started screaming randomly from headaches. Another woman, Mrs. Pearson, developed a strange shake in her hand she'd never had before. One evening, I covered a late shift for a coworker. As I was getting supplies, I overheard Miss Parker talking in her office. She didn't know I could hear her through the wall. She was on the phone, telling someone that the families believed her loved ones were too sick for visits, and that the studies were on schedule. She said they were getting paid twice what was agreed for the ongoing drug trial. My hands shook as I realized I'd stumbled upon something wrong. I started quietly keeping notes about the unexplained shots, about symptoms that got worse, not better. One night, soon after, Mrs. Pearson passed away in her sleep. The official word was that it was natural, but I'd seen her smile and laugh just the day before. At her funeral, her son told me he regretted not visiting more, thinking he wouldn't even remember him. That was my breaking point. I looked up Mrs. Washington's daughter online. She lived nearby and was posting desperate messages about missing her mom. I wanted to reach out, but doubt crept in. What if it was really for the best? But something inside me felt wrong about staying silent. I kept my notes, considering calling the families or health authorities. But that's when Mistress Parker called me into her office one morning. She had a folder with my name on it, filled with reports that I'd been acting strangely, making up stories, behaving erratically. She warned me that given my own history, nobody would believe me if I accused anyone. I could easily end up forced out, or worse. At night, I started getting mysterious calls. Heavy breathing alive, never a word spoken. My apartment felt different, as if someone had been inside, though everything looked the same. Next morning, I quit my job and never went back. Sometimes I drive by the old hospital and wonder if what happened in that wing ever stopped. Did the families ever find out what happened? Or do they still think their parents and grandparents simply forgot who they were? I still wish I had done more, but I am telling the story now because I believe people should know. Sometimes the real horror behind hospital doors is what's kept from the families, not the patients themselves.
When people can't speak for themselves, it's up to the rest of us to stay alert to what's happening in the shallows.